a criminal who was sent to prison. But he was so arrogant, so why did even the prison warden show him such respect? This man's name was Johann, a former doctor at Seoul Hospital. He was sentenced to prison for using medication without authorization that caused a patient to die. However, he didn't think what he did was wrong. Don't be fooled by his handsome appearance. People actually considered him crazy. He stitched up wounds without using any medicine, a series of powerful actions that stunned other prisoners. They all respected him as their leader. What made him famous was that he had saved someone while in prison. The prison doctor was an intern who, upon seeing the patient's symptoms, immediately turned around and ran out to call the hospital. The group of wardens had to go out to find a solution. They had just left when someone entered the infirmary. He went to the bedside. With a glance, he knew that the patient was having difficulty breathing because of internal bleeding in his chest. After a simple disinfection, he found the right place on the patient's chest, took a syringe, inserted it into the patient's body and drained all the blood clots in his chest. This situation was child's play for Johann. Soon after, the patient was out of danger and woke up. Then, he calmly walked out and continued his cleaning duties. When the group of wardens rushed back, they only saw Johann's number on his chest. His presence was like a god in prison. All the doctors in prison ran away in fear of Johann's abilities. Today was the first day for intern Dr. Shi Young. Suddenly, a fat guy fell to the ground. Shi Young hurried over to check him up. Even though she knew the fat guy had gotten a fishbone stuck in his throat while eating, and had also eaten expired sausage at night, she still couldn't diagnose the problem. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the crowd. Only the voice could be heard, but not the person. The warden suddenly saw him following the direction of the pointed finger. Everyone rushed to make way. It turned out Johann was standing nearby. Where he was, there was hope. It was as if he was the modern-day living Buddha. At this moment, Shi Young asked him what the patient was suffering from. Johann sarcastically mocked Shi Young while confirming his own judgment. He calmly said that it was because the fishbone had pierced the trachea, plus the expired sausage carried bacteria and caused an infection, which led to swelling, blocking the trachea, making it difficult to breathe. At that moment, Shi Young suddenly understood. It was as if a wise man had pointed it out to her, and she had been enlightened. Johann told Shi Young to insert a breathing tube for the patient, to help him breathe. Obviously, Shi Young was still an intern and had never done practical training like this before, so she didn't know where to begin. Johann stood beside her, holding her hand and guiding her on how to do it. Shi Young overcame her psychological barrier and successfully inserted the breathing tube. The patient gradually regained signs of life. At that moment, everyone sighed in relief. Although it was dangerous, Shi Young had saved a person. Just when she was about to thank Johann happily, he calmly pushed his cart and left. He came, but he didn't stay. What remained was the legend about him. When the patient was transferred to a larger hospital, Shi Young told the doctor the exact cause of the disease. At this moment, the doctor was very surprised. At this moment, young Bo came to see the doctor. Everyone thought that he was faking an illness. When facing the female doctor, he just said that he had a stomachache. Intern Dr. Shi Young didn't take it too seriously, thinking it was just a mild cold, completely ignoring the rash on his hands and feet. He was due to be released in another week. He happily went to thank Johann, but Johann said that he would be dead before he was released. Jung Bo was stunned for a moment. It turned out that Johann knew his illness better than Shi Young. The next day, Johann went to see Shi Young and told her about Jung Bo's pathology. He didn't only have a high fever and stomachache, but he also had diarrhea, vomiting, rash on his hands and feet, fever and sweating. He directly asked if it was possible that this was carpal tunnel syndrome. Shi Young was not convinced, saying it was just a skin problem. At most, it was acute appendicitis. However, Johann reminded Shi Young to transfer Jung Bo to a larger hospital. Shi Young was speechless at Johann's unreasonable words. There was no equipment here to examine Jung Bo. How could he be so confident? Shi Young said, "Are your eyes a scanner?" And in fact, his eyes were a scanner. Shi Young warned him, "Get out quickly." As a result, Johann proved to her that his judgment was right. He told Shi Young that she was a third-year intern because her expensive backpack was bought 2 years ago. During her internship, she couldn't afford to buy it. He even said that she would go abroad tonight. Shi Young was instantly speechless at Johann's keen observation. Every word pierced her heart, making her cry before leaving. Johann kept urging Shi Young. Sure enough, in the evening, Jung Bo's pain escalated and his veins were prominent. Unfortunately, it still happened. Johann rushed over to examine him. He opened Jung Bo's hand and foot, both covered in rashes, and shone a flashlight to check the situation. Jung Bo's condition was very bad at this time. The warden said he would call 911 for help immediately. At the same time, Shi Young was dragging her suitcase to board the plane to go abroad. The ambulance arrived, but Shi Young was nowhere to be seen. Johann started to get anxious to find Shi Young. At this moment, Shi Young got into a taxi. Just then, the warden appeared and stopped her. From the warden's account, she learned that Jung Bo was in critical danger. Shi Young was torn between the only opportunity to go abroad and saving Jung-bo. Now, the only person who could save Jung-bo was Shi Young. Yo-han knew that if she wasn't there, Jung-bo would surely die. So, he held the paramedics tight. Shi Young did not let everyone down, she appeared. Yo-han begged her to save Jung-bo. He said he completely trusted Shi Young. This was the first time someone had trusted her that she could save a patient. Jung-bo was taken to a larger hospital. Shi Young told the doctor to check his kidney first. The doctor thought Shi Young's words and actions were absurd. So, he asked Shi Young, "Is this Yo-han's idea?" Shi Young asked the doctor back, "Do you two know each other?" The doctor helplessly sighed and said that Yo-han was like a ghost. He didn't believe Yo-han's judgment. As a result, when the test report came out, he was instantly slapped in the face. Sure enough, his kidney had problems. The urine test was positive. At this moment, Yo-han called to tell Shi Young that Jung-bo had a 0.001% chance of having Fabry disease, with a 100% chance of death. Yoo-jun also said it was impossible because there were less than 100 people with Fabry disease in the whole country. Yo-han cared about patient Jung-bo, so he called Shi Young again. He told Shi Young to urge the doctor to do a kidney biopsy. Furthermore, he also had to investigate whether Jung-bo's family had a history of genetic disease. Originally, Shi Young was going abroad today, but now Yo-han confused her. Shi Young asked Yo-han why. Yo-han replied that he let the warden take Jung-bo to see the doctor. If the warden told the doctor that Jung-bo had Fabry disease, there was no way the doctor would believe him. At that time, he would surely only postpone the treatment. It would be best to diagnose and treat the patient. After much deliberation, it turned out Yo-han just wanted Shi Young to convey the information for him. Yo-han was shameless. He also wanted Shi Young to find treatment methods and imatinib for Fabry disease nationwide. Shi Young called every large hospital throughout the night to ask. In the end, her effort paid off. Shi Young found the treatment. Shi Young happily went on her way. But Yoo-jun criticized her. He said that he had never misdiagnosed a patient. This time, Jung-bo was no exception. Yoo-jun was very proud of himself and extremely confident. Shi Young also believed in Yo-han's diagnosis, so she quickly went to get the medicine to give the patient hope. The next day, Yoo-jun went to find Shi Young with the kidney biopsy report in his hand. The results showed that no striations were found. This proved that Jung-bo did not have Fabry disease. At this moment, Yoo-jun said to Shi Young that she had been fooled by Yo-han. To investigate the reason for Yo-han's imprisonment, Shi Young braved the heavy rain and ran back to the prison, opening Yo-han's file. Shi Young couldn't believe her eyes. She saw that he was convicted of euthanasia. It turned out that he had injected the patient with an overdose of sedatives so that the patient could die peacefully. As a result, the prosecutor accused him of euthanasia. So he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. While Shi Young was still dazed, Yo-han walked into the room. Shi Young said to him, "Jung-bo doesn't have Fabry disease. He just has kidney sclerosis. The doctor's treatment plan is to inject steroids." Yo-han knew very well that injecting steroids would accelerate the process of kidney failure. Before Yo-han finished speaking, Shi Young interrupted him and said that he had abandoned the patient, ending their life and heartbeat. She criticized him for being unqualified to be a doctor. At that moment, Yo-han smiled unexpectedly. He believed that his decision was right and he had no regrets. Then Yo-han asked Shi Young, "Didn't you also decide to abandon a patient?" A sudden flash of memory appeared in Shi Young's mind. She couldn't save the patient, and that patient who was about to die was her father. That's why she wanted to escape from here and fly abroad. Yo-han continued to question her. At this moment, Yo-han revealed his thoughts. As a doctor who witnessed patients suffering and was unable to escape the pain, the only thing he could do was end their suffering. At this moment, Shi Young, who was full of tears, gradually calmed down. Yo-han told Shi Young to save the current patient, Jung-bo. As a result, a message came through. Jung-bo had disappeared. Shi Young immediately ran to find Jung-bo. When she reached the door, she saw Yo-han. At this moment, Yo-han was still convinced of his judgment. So, he told Shi Young, "Go back to the hospital with Yoo-jun and find Jung-bo in a hurry." In the end, she found Jung-bo on the roof of the hospital. Luckily, Yoo-jun hugged Jung-bo at a crucial moment. At this moment, he was safe from death. The reason why Jung-bo was standing on the roof in a daze was because of the Fabry disease, which caused him to hallucinate. So, Shi Young asked Yoo-jun to do the enzyme test again. As a result, she was bluntly refused by Yoo-jun. She was sure that the patient in front of her had Fabry disease, so she asked Dr. Yoo-jun to do an in-depth enzyme test. Dr. Yoo-jun was confident that his judgment was right. Furthermore, he wanted to shift the responsibility and transfer the patient to a larger hospital. So, Shi Young was kicked out of the ward. At this moment, the legendary prison doctor, Yo-han, appeared. Yoo-jun finally saw his true face. Yoo-jun curiously asked, "Isn't Yo-han a prisoner? How can he appear here?" It turned out that at 12 o'clock today, Yo-han was released after completing his sentence. However, an hour earlier, through Shi Young's account, Johan learned about Yu Jun's plan to transfer Jung Bo to a larger hospital. He was burning with anger. He had 1 more hour to complete his sentence. If he hadn't appeared to stop Jung Bo from being transferred, then during the transfer, Jung Bo would have died because he missed the best time for treatment. So Johan mentioned imatinib. As soon as Shi Young heard the name of the medicine, she understood. So she hurriedly went to find Yu Jun to get the medicine for the disease and said that this medicine could be used as a preventive measure during the transfer. Yu Jun didn't think much and agreed to Shi Young's request. At the same time, Jung Bo's father blamed himself, saying that his wife was also misdiagnosed and died. Furthermore, not long ago, Jung Bo's sister also died from chronic kidney failure. Now, his brother was also seriously ill and had to use a wheelchair. Shi Young suddenly remembered, isn't this a genetic disease in the family? So, she hurriedly ran over and said to Yu Jun, if the mother has Fabry disease, there is a 50% chance of transmitting the disease to her son. Shi Young seemed like she was being possessed. She kept saying that Jung Bo had Fabry disease. Perhaps she was just trying to make her conscience feel a little better to make up for misdiagnosing Jung Bo. Yu Jun said that she was crazy. Anyway, he still wanted to transfer Jung Bo, so he kicked Shi Young out of the room, who was being stubborn. Back in time, Johan told Yu Jun that he and Jung Bo were in the same prison, and he had observed Jung Bo for over a year. All the signs proved that this was Fabry disease. The reason why Yu Jun had checked the kidney biopsy multiple times and still didn't find it was because there were too many necrotic cells and the striations could not be seen. If it had been discovered early and diagnosed as Fabry disease, then there would have been enough time to cure it. Johan said to Yu Jun, are you sure that if you diagnose Jung Bo with ordinary kidney failure and inject him with steroids, causing him to die, you can bear the responsibility? At this moment, Yu Jun thought that Johan was intimidating him. When the two of them were arguing, Shi Young saw the medicine on the tray and decided to inject Jung Bo herself. Yu Jun immediately stopped her, making Shi Young slip and drop the medicine. Luckily, Johan caught the only medicine in the whole country and injected it into the patient on the spot. But now, he didn't have a medical license, so if he insisted on injecting the medicine, it would be an illegal act. So, Johan handed the syringe to Shi Young and motioned for her to do it. Shi Young didn't hesitate to take it and inject the medicine. Yu Jun asked her if she could take responsibility for this. Shi Young not only said she could, but also said the words Johan had told her. The reason why the patient is in pain is because the doctor didn't do anything, so he's in pain. If the doctor can't cure the pain, then he must help the patient end this pain. At this moment, Jung Bo's brother and father appeared in the ward. Like his sister and mother, they couldn't bear Jung Bo's death. So they cried and begged the doctors to save Jung Bo at all costs. After getting the family's consent, Shi Young and Yu Jun checked Jung Bo's condition again. The results were eye-opening. Jung Bo was indeed diagnosed with Fab syndrome. After the correct diagnosis, Jung Bo was finally saved. Johan also humbly got into the car and left the hospital. Shi Young desperately chased after him. Unfortunately, she couldn't catch up with him. However, the next day, Shi Young met Johan again at the large hospital in Seoul. They became teacher and student. Who would be so indifferent to public opinion and invite Dr. Johan, who had killed a patient, to be a professor? It was none other than Shi Young's mother. Dr. Johan's intention was that he wanted to end the patient's pain, so he injected them with an overdose of sedatives to let them die peacefully. From Johan's perspective, he hadn't done anything wrong. But the cunning prosecutor Seok Ki kept hounding him. He even set up hidden cameras and monitored Johan's every move, wanting to catch him and send him back to prison. At this moment, he was afraid that Johan's background was on the desk of Seoul's largest hospital. The beautiful head of the department, Tae Kyung, was determined to invite Johan to be a professor in the orthopedics department and serve as the face of the entire hospital. Why invite Johan, who had a history of murder, to be a representative? Of course, there would be objections, and Kwon Seok was the one who objected to this matter. He said that Johan was a murderer, but Tae Kyung completely trusted his abilities. The previous year, before the law regarding euthanasia was introduced, Johan had gained an outstanding reputation in the medical community for treating pain-related diseases. Johan's ability was truly worthy of his fame. No one was more suitable for the position of professor in the orthopedics department than him. The doctors present all exclaimed that Johan was a medical genius. But Kwon Seok still held a dissenting opinion. It turned out that Johan had a criminal record, and he was able to enter the large hospital because of one Gil, Tae Kyung's teacher. Even Dean I-moon had nothing to say. At the same time, Tae Kyung announced that he would allow Shi Young's daughter to return to the hospital to continue her internship. Suddenly, the whole auditorium started to buzz. He said that Shi Young had undergone psychological treatment, but she truly didn't disappoint Tae Kyung's expectations. She was able to let go of the knot of not being able to save her father. When he and Shi Young climbed the mountain, the rope slipped and they fell into a ravine. His waist hit a rock hard. When she found Isu, he only had a faint pulse. She flipped her father over and found that his abdomen was bleeding profusely. In her panic, Shi Young picked up her phone to call 911 for help, but her phone had broken and she couldn't make a call. She pretended to make a call to give Isu some hope. Time passed by minute. The sky also became pitch black, and there was heavy snow. Shi Young helped Isu up and said she wanted to leave this place. Her father, who didn't know what was going on, said, "Just wait, the rescue team will be here soon." At this moment, she told him that no one would come to save them. They could only rely on themselves now. Isu knew he couldn't hold on anymore, so he asked Shi Young about his current situation. She was in tears and told her father that he had a grade 10 fracture. So he tremblingly said to her, "Shi Young, listen to your father and let go of your blood-stained hands." Isu fainted. Now, he was a vegetable lying in the hospital. Her sister, Mireille, felt that it was because Shi Young gave up saving their father that this tragedy had happened. So, she hated her. This made Shi Young's psychological shadow even worse. She felt guilty and didn't dare to face her own uselessness, which made Isu bedridden. She wanted to escape from the condemnation of reality. She even wanted to give up her job as a doctor until she met Johan. He never abandoned a patient. He never regretted what happened 3 years ago, because everything he did was to make the patients feel better. So Shi Young was positively influenced by Johan and resolved to continue her medical career. What Shi Young didn't expect was that Johan would be her mentor. Shi Young immediately retracted her rudeness to him before. They weren't really close and were in a different environment, so they didn't talk much. Suddenly, Jung Woo interrupted them. He said the Korean boxing champion, Jung Woo, was in the ophthalmology department and pointed to Johan. As soon as they met, Johan immediately took off his bandage. It seemed like they had met before. Turns out, during yesterday's boxing match, Jung Woo was dominating but suddenly collapsed. Doctors in the department trembled whenever they mentioned Johan. They respected each other but kept their distance. Even so, Johan was invited by Tae-kyung to work there, given his extraordinary skills. Surprisingly, on his first day, he didn't introduce himself. Instead, he walked right up and started scribbling on the board. He cut the outer corner of Hyung Woo's eye and started explaining a surgery to relieve pressure caused by the optic nerve being compressed. Kwon Se-ok, who always opposed Johan, scoffed. Even Dr. Yoon Jung was confused, saying, "If this is an eye problem, then it's obviously the ophthalmologist's responsibility, not something for Johan from the pain management department to worry about." It turned out that during yesterday's boxing match, Jung Woo was dominating the ring. Suddenly, he lost strength and got kicked hard in the eye by his opponent. He couldn't see clearly. The world went dark. Coincidentally, Johan was there, witnessing everything. He told Hyung Woo to go to the ophthalmology department immediately, or he would go blind. However, Hyung Woo couldn't leave the ring. His reputation and glory were at stake. Just as Johan was about to leave, Hyung Woo called him back and asked him to perform surgery to fix the blockage right there. One daring to speak, one daring to act. Johan didn't hesitate and asked staff for disinfectant, medical clamps, povidone, and lidocaine. He told Hyung Woo that he wasn't an ophthalmologist or a surgeon, and had just gotten out of prison not long ago. Hyung Woo didn't seem worried. He had a fight to win, so Johan directly opened his eye to relieve the blockage. The next day, Hyung Woo came to the hospital with sunglasses on and a wounded leg. The truth was, he was still experiencing blurry vision. So as soon as he arrived, he pointed at Johan, who had performed surgery on him the day before. The moment they met, it felt like they were best friends. Johan didn't hesitate to take off his bandage and grab the ophthalmologist's flashlight to check on the situation. The male doctor criticized Johan for being reckless and violating regulations by performing surgery on Hyung Woo individually. Who would be responsible if something went wrong? Johan ignored the doctor's question. He asked about Hyung Woo's intraocular pressure check, if his pupils were reacting normally and if his vision was clear. All the vital readings came back normal. However, Hyung Woo complained about blurry vision and dizziness, which was the most important detail. Johan was meticulous and didn't miss any clues. That's why on his first day at work, instead of introducing himself, he put the patient first, discussing the cause with everyone else. However, he faced opposition from Kwon Se-ok. Just then, the entire hospital received a notice announcing that Hyung Woo's vision had completely recovered. However, Johan mentioned that Hyung Woo had mild diabetes, sometimes experienced dizziness without a clear cause, and suffered from blurred vision, which had recovered shortly after. Johan asked the other doctors, "Isn't this also a normal situation?" At the same time, Hyung Woo was taking pictures with the chief and other doctors before being discharged. Johan appeared and stopped him from being discharged, saying he couldn't compete yet and needed to stay for further examinations to determine the root cause of his illness. However, Hyung Woo was confident in his health and didn't think further tests were necessary. He believed that the more casual you were, the more problems you'd have. Johan knew he was aware of his unusual health condition. Hyung-woo just laughed and said, "How could I compete if something was wrong with me?" Then he left, forgetting his watch in the hospital. Yo-han knew he would be back for it, so he arranged for Shi-young to talk to him. She told him it wasn't an eye problem, but a problem in the brain's nervous system. Hyung-woo told her he had signed a letter previously stating his intention to stop life-sustaining treatment and asked her to convey this to Yo-han. Even if he were unconscious one day and brought to the hospital, he wouldn't want any pointless emergency procedures. He put on his sunglasses and left. Knowing time was of the essence, Shi-young ran after him, begging him to stay for further examinations. But Hyung-woo was arrogant and ignored her pleas. As he was going down the stairs, he suddenly lost strength in his legs and fell. The doctor said the brain CT showed nothing unusual, only a lumbar disc herniation, and said Hyung-woo should be transferred to the orthopedic department for treatment. Suddenly, the miracle Dr. Yo-han appeared and interrupted their conversation. He suspected Hyung-woo had a neurological disease, not an orthopedic injury. If his lumbar disc was herniated, it wouldn't cause sudden dizziness and blurry vision. So, Yo-han told him directly. Hyung-woo didn't believe his guess. He turned to the male doctor and asked him to treat his leg injury. His condition was serious and a family member was needed to make the decision. Mentioning family, Hyung-woo suddenly became irritable. It seemed like he was hiding something. Yo-han summoned the doctors in the department to find the cause of Hyung-woo's illness. Shi-young discovered that he had recently gone on a safari trip to South Africa, and the vaccinations he received might have damaged his nerve cells, leading to a 182 partition syndrome. Shi-young's insightful idea gave Yo-han another piece of evidence. Hyung-woo might have optic neuritis. While they were eating, Shi-young told Yo-han that Hyung-woo's fall was similar to leg pain or muscle dysfunction. Yo-han tapped his fingers on the table, and inspiration struck. There were several signs that Hyung-woo was hiding his illness. At the same time, Hyung-woo found Chief Moon and head of department Tae-kyung and told them Yo-han was obstructing his treatment. They found Yo-han and Shi-young and criticized them for taking action without authorization. If they caused an unmanageable outcome, Hyung-woo was a public figure, and if he sued the hospital, it would surely damage their reputation. Moon asked Yo-han, "Do you want to go down the same path as 3 years ago?" Yo-han explained, "If they still worry about me, then I have no reason to stay here." He turned around and left. Although he said he didn't need to stay, Yo-han still couldn't give up on his patient. So, he found the doctor in charge of treating Hyung-woo and told him again that Hyung-woo didn't have an eye problem, but a brain problem, or possibly optic neuritis. Dr. Yo-han requested an MRI to confirm the cause of the illness. This made the male doctor even more annoyed with Yo-han, claiming that he wasn't doing anything. He added that he had already done all the necessary examinations, and the results showed nothing unusual. During the day, Hyung-woo saw a crowd protesting the hospital's decision to hire Yo-han as a doctor. He decided to meet with Yo-han privately, and asked him, "Why did you show up at the fight I was in?" Yo-han told him he was observing and experiencing the pain that happens in the ring, like bone fractures, muscle tears, and pain from central nervous system damage. Experiencing pain firsthand could help him help patients manage their pain. Hyung-woo then confided that he had gone to South Africa, became unconscious, and lay in a hospital bed unable to move, with blurry vision. He could only breathe with the help of a ventilator. Hyung-woo had dedicated his life to winning and breaking records. He couldn't accept the fear of spending his life in a hospital bed, so he asked Yo-han, "If one day I end up paralyzed, please do me a favor and help me pass peacefully, just like you did 3 years ago." Yo-han replied, "I help patients manage their pain, not their life's pain." However, Hyung-woo didn't want to experience even a single minute of a life not worth living. He could endure any injury from fighting, but he couldn't accept becoming a vegetable. Yo-han was completely at a loss with Hyung-woo. That evening, Hyung-woo suddenly started breathing rapidly. The medical staff quickly began treatment. The male doctor, who had no experience inserting breathing tubes, hesitated to act and called for help from another doctor. However, he shirked responsibility, saying, "He's not my patient. Why should I help?" Just then, Yo-han appeared and took the breathing tube. The other 2 doctors were arguing and asked Yo-han if he could take responsibility. He ignored them. Thanks to Yo-han's efforts, Hyung-woo regained his heartbeat. Seeing Yo-han wholeheartedly dedicated to the patient's safety, Shi-young couldn't believe it. 3 years ago, he had committed murder. The whiteboard was full of analyses of Hyung-woo's illness, clearly showing that Yo-han had spent night after night filtering out a series of possible causes. It made the other doctors feel ashamed. Finally, Yo-han concluded that Hyung-woo's illness was myasthenia gravis. This was a neurological condition, not an orthopedic one. Yet, Yo-han still asked Shi-young to get a blood sample for analysis. However, she objected, saying, "We don't have the right to do that. You're really out of line." Meanwhile, the hospital received unexpected news. Myung-oh, Hyung-woo's lawyer, followed his client's wishes and pulled the ventilator to let Hyung-woo pass peacefully. Moon immediately panicked. If Hyung-woo died in the hospital, It would not only face public scrutiny, but his family would sue the hospital for murder. Surprisingly, Kwon Seok blamed Yo-han for messing things up, but Tae-kyung said, "Right now, it's not about pursuing anyone's responsibility, but finding the cause of the patient's illness is most important." Soon after, Hyung-woo's father pleaded with the hospital to treat his son, no matter what, even if it cost a fortune. However, Hyung-woo's wife said, "It's not me or his father, but Hyung-woo's own wish." Their life philosophy was that Hyung-woo was a champion and couldn't accept spending the rest of his life in a hospital bed, living a life not worth living. But his stubborn father insisted that the hospital do everything possible to save his son. After gaining the family's consent, they could begin the appropriate treatment, but the cause of the illness was still unknown. Myung-oh ordered the hospital to forbid Yo-han from treating Hyung-woo. His heart burned with frustration. He had the skills and knew Hyung-woo's condition, but he was forbidden from treating him. The other doctor diagnosed Hyung-woo with severe pneumonia, causing respiratory failure. He needed to administer the appropriate antibiotics before removing the ventilator. His father cheered him on, and his daughter held his hand for strength. Only Yo-han felt heavy-hearted. He continuously reviewed Hyung-woo's test results. Unexpectedly, he noticed blue levothyroxine in the prescription. If the diagnosis was pneumonia, injecting blue levothyroxine could worsen his condition, making it uncontrollable. After realizing this, Yo-han rushed to the medicine room and got a test for myasthenia gravis, ilium chloride. He went to Hyung-woo's room, but Shi-young stopped him, saying, "If it's for the patient, don't waste time." Yo-han immediately went to the room, but the attending doctor sarcastically asked him who he was. Upon seeing Yo-han's name tag, his expression changed and he said, "You don't need to intrude here." As a result, the patient's hands and feet suddenly went uncontrolled, and his blood pressure dropped. Everyone was incredibly tense. At this point, the doctor realized he needed to perform a brain scan on the patient, and there wasn't much time to waste. Yo-han pulled out the ilium chloride and requested a test. The doctor still blocked him, saying, "If the ilium chloride fails, the patient will have cardiac arrest. Can you handle that responsibility?" Yo-han turned to Hyung-woo and asked if he would agree to let him try. Seeing Yo-han's concern, Hyung-woo agreed to his request. Yo-han quickly injected the ilium chloride test solution. Everyone held their breath. Finally, the nerves in Hyung-woo's fingers started working again, and his heart rate and blood pressure returned to normal. Now the whole family felt relieved. It proved Yo-han's suspicions were right. The doctor's dedication not only saved the patient's life, but also saved the entire family. The previous day, Ji-seok's arm was cut by a shard of glass and the blood wouldn't stop. His face didn't change, and he didn't feel any pain. He even brutally pulled the glass shard out of his hand with ease, making everyone around him stunned. Even when Dr. Yo-han pressed hard on the wound on his hand, Ji-seok didn't react. His mother was shocked by this behavior. Yo-han, with his vast experience, knew he was dealing with his patient. He immediately performed surgery on Ji-seok. The entire stitching process was done without anesthesia. Yo-han suspected this was the first case of congenital analgesia in medical history. Dr. Yu-jun thought Yo-han was mistaken, saying that in the patient's current state, stitching without anesthesia, even bone fractures and internal organ rupture wouldn't cause any pain. This was only possible in textbooks. Everyone found it unbelievable, but the patient couldn't feel the body temperature of a normal person. He even had sudden bowel movements without knowing when. He was definitely a ticking time bomb. Yo-han became famous for successfully treating Hyung-woo. During a media interview, he mentioned the case of the patient who lacked pain sensation. He dipped Ji-seok's hand in ice water. Yo-han introduced this as a characteristic of congenital analgesia. Unexpectedly, Ji-seok slowly removed his hand from the ice water and said that he could feel the ice hurting his hand. He felt his hand numb. So, Yo-han quickly took a silver needle and stabbed it into Ji-seok's foot. He didn't know what the problem was. The patient couldn't heal himself. Without feeling pain, Yo-han kept reviewing Ji-seok's test reports. Ju-yoon also told him that the patient's test results showed abnormalities compared to the previous day. Suddenly, head nurse Hong said, "Ji-seok's leg hurts as if it's about to break." Seeing the patient in unbearable pain, Yo-han just stood there, his mind blank. He even started to doubt himself. Ji-seok was scanned again from head to toe, showing nothing unusual. But he still had the pain symptoms. The doctors kept speculating about phantom pain and phantom limb pain. Finally, Shi-young suggested searching for causes of infection and poisoning. The results were still not satisfactory. In the elevator, she suddenly got an idea. She read in a book about a deaf person who could hear music, because they couldn't hear so they could hear in a way, because they couldn't see so they could see in a way. This was a signal from the brain showing it was yearning for sensation. Because it hadn't received stimulation for too long, it confidently created stimulation through images and sounds. Ji-seok's case was exactly the same. The pain he felt was a signal from his brain yearning for sensation, with the nerve cells spontaneously emitting signals to show their activity. That's why the patient felt pain. It was a mistake. Thus, they determined the patient had central nervous system hyperesthesia. Finally, the puzzle in Johan's mind was solved. He touched Shi Young's head and praised her for doing a great job. She was extremely happy. Meanwhile, Ji Seok, disheartened, told his mother that he couldn't be cured. But at least, he now felt the wrong pain. Ji Seok refused treatment. So Johan pushed him to the office and opened the files. What caught his eye was the report of fractures in various locations. This was the real ticking time bomb. Ji Seok didn't have congenital analgesia. Johan reassured him that there was still a chance. So Ji Seok told his mother that he would accept surgery. The surgery went smoothly. He regained his sense of pain like a normal person. Shi Young was curious, so she asked Johan what patient file he was looking at. That night, she opened his computer and saw different CT scans. She couldn't believe her eyes. Suddenly, the patient's name was written as Johan's father. Shi Young couldn't believe her eyes. It turned out Johan was a patient with congenital analgesia. He dedicated his life to saving others, but there was no cure for him. He wanted to save so many people, so he hid his condition from the hospital and the world. However, Shi Young, his intern, saw his medical record. She was stunned. She didn't understand. She didn't believe it. The world responded to him with pain, but he responded with song. Johan slowly walked toward Shi Young and told her that when he was 12 years old, his father suddenly vomited blood and then collapsed to the ground. When he grabbed his phone to call the police for help, his father didn't know what pain was. He didn't understand the sensation of pain anywhere. He was helpless, as was his father, living in a world without cold, heat, or pain. They also couldn't feel the pain of others. They lived like empty shells. Unexpected injuries could happen any time and death could come suddenly. From then on, he became a doctor, checking his body temperature and blood pressure every day, and taking regular blood tests. He turned his bedroom into an ICU ward. He also installed cameras to monitor his movements while sleeping. At night, he couldn't feel the pain. While sleeping, he might rub his eyes until his cornea broke, or he might bite off his tongue. It turned out he had always lived in such loneliness. Johan thought his condition as a patient would never be discovered. Now, Shi Young had accidentally found out. He asked her to help him keep this secret. If the hospital knew he had congenital analgesia, he would surely be fired. If that happened, Johan would no longer be able to save people. Shi Young saw that a patient with congenital analgesia, in a state where they couldn't feel pain in their hands or feet, would become unsightly, and they wouldn't even know if they broke a bone. Shi Young felt extremely sad. Johan too could have such a tragic day. She stayed up all night, not sleeping, constantly thinking about what could happen to him. The next day, from Ju Yoon's account, Shi Young learned that Johan had called in sick. She was anxious and panicked, rushing to his house, knocking on the door but getting no answer. Shi Young thought Johan had fallen ill inside the house. She grabbed her phone and called the police. Suddenly, he appeared and called her. Upon turning around and seeing Johan, Shi Young hurriedly asked if he had a fever or any external injuries. But actually, Johan was taking a walk. Shi Young worried about him like a mother. Her sudden concern for him left him momentarily speechless. No one had ever cared about him like this before, and he didn't seem to need it. As a result, when he got off work that evening, Johan suddenly felt dizzy. His vision blurred, the world spun, his limbs lost strength, and his body swayed. Just then, a reporter appeared in front of him. Johan couldn't let the reporter know that he had congenital analgesia. The consequences were unimaginable. Since he hadn't been contacted beforehand, Johan declined the interview and quickly left. Dizziness and ringing in his ears made him suffer. He couldn't stand up straight and fell heavily down the stairs. The reporter Sung-won continued to follow him. Johan dragged his heavy body, grabbed the doorknob and left. But he fell in the hospital corridor. Fortunately, Shi Young appeared in time, pulling Johan into the elevator to avoid Sung-won. After that, a patient with an infection appeared in the hospital, spitting a mouthful of phlegm in Shi Young's face. They quickly sealed off the orthopedic center. Even though Shi Young accidentally fell in the operating room, she wouldn't let Johan get involved and risk himself. An elderly man, named Dak Gyu, 70 years old, was the person who had close contact with him. He not only didn't wear a mask in the enclosed space, but also coughed and spat everywhere, touching the handrail with the virus. Shi Young examined Dak Gyu, and he suddenly started coughing continuously. As a result, he coughed up phlegm. Shi Young was sprayed with blood all over her face, likely infected. The nurses nearby were scared and their eyes widened. Dr. Ju Yoon nervously summoned everyone together, and, based on Dak Gyu's symptoms, they suspected the Nipah virus. So, he ordered the orthopedic clinic to be sealed off and isolation zones to be set up. At this point, Johan was walking toward the isolation zone. Shi Young called him to tell him not to go in. As a result, he had left his phone in his pocket and couldn't hear. As Johan reached the door, Tae-kyung locked the main door, trapping him outside. The series of actions confused him. He didn't know why. Tae-kyung ordered everyone to stay put, and no one was allowed in until the risk of transmission was eliminated. Ju-yoon was locked inside and called Yo-han to tell him about Shi-young being sprayed with phlegm by Dok-yu. Yo-han's heart trembled. Mi-rae also started worrying about Shi-young. The National Disease Control Agency then took over the isolation zone. The patients who had close contact with Dok-yu were moved to a separate operating room for examination. He was also concerned if he had contracted the Nipah virus. Shi-young wanted to reassure the elderly man to accept the examination, so she comforted him by saying that it was just suspected to be the Nipah virus. Just then, Yo-han called and interrupted their conversation. Shi-young reported to him about the situation, saying that there were many others in the isolation zone who had been on the same bus as Dok-yu to the hospital. They now also had symptoms like headaches, nausea, and fever. Yo-han felt like he was in another world. He stood next to Shi-young and told her that the situation was incredibly serious. Not only was Dok-yu a critical patient, but there were other patients outside. Yo-han comforted Shi-young, saying, "This time, I'm not going to let a tragedy happen again." Suddenly, the old man's heart rate spiked to 200. Yo-han instructed Shi-young to inject a sympathetic nerve blocker to lower his heart rate. Although his heart rate returned to normal, Dok-yu still felt like his heart was being squeezed, so Shi-young told him that he needed a chest x-ray. The old man slowly stood up and walked in the opposite direction of her. Clearly, Dok-yu had lost his sense of direction. Shi-young went to check if he was still conscious. Suddenly, he fell toward her. Shi-young couldn't catch Dok-yu. She lost her balance and fell. Her head hit the corner of the table hard, and she fainted. Yo-han panicked, worried for Shi-young's safety. As the pillar of the department, he should face this difficult time with his colleagues. So, Yo-han asked Tae-kyung if he could go inside. Kwon-suk firmly opposed his idea, but Yo-han knew that Dok-yu had been suffering from headaches for a year and suspected he didn't have the Nipah virus. He needed to go inside to investigate further, but no matter what he said, Kwon-suk wouldn't let him into the isolation zone. To make matters worse, Tae-kyung also disagreed. However, at this time a mother said, "My son has diabetes. He needs the medicine I have on hand." So Yo-han said, "I need to go in and treat the child," and Tae-kyung no longer objected. After overcoming all the obstacles, Yo-han finally entered Dok-yu's room. Shi-young was in a daze when she saw him. After she regained consciousness, she firmly criticized him for coming in. Shi-young thought that Yo-han had come in for her. He was a patient with congenital analgesia, and if he got infected, the consequences were unimaginable. As a result, Yo-han said, "It's not because of Shi-young that I came in." He put her protective gear back on and continued to examine Dok-yu. Shi-young was worried about Yo-han. A patient with congenital analgesia is in a high-risk group. He shouldn't be here. However, Yo-han said, "I am a negotiator between viruses and patients, so I need to be here more than anyone else." At the same time, Kwon-suk reported to Imun that Yo-han had disobeyed the arrangements and entered the isolation zone. However, Tae-kyung defended Yo-han as usual. But Imun couldn't tell right from wrong. He insulted him, saying, "After this is over, we need to punish Yo-han." Yo-han quickly created a group chat to analyze Dok-yu's condition. A year ago, he had chronic headaches and poor appetite. He recently started vomiting, having a fever and chest pain. Now he had symptoms like a rapid heart rate, disorientation, cramps, and rapid heartbeat. Therefore, Yo-han suspected that it wasn't the Nipah virus which had recently appeared overseas. So, he assigned tasks to other doctors to be responsible for different parts of the patient, to compile and analyze the records for him. He didn't miss any clues related to the patient. Mi-rae told Yo-han that she had met Dok-yu 6 months ago. He was a priest and believed in deities. He had lost 15 kilograms in 6 months without any symptoms. They then asked about his recent condition. He said he couldn't sleep at night and had been taking sleeping pills continuously. He couldn't forgive himself. He believed that Dok-yu's illness was a deserved retribution because he had murdered countless people. This was God punishing Dok-yu, and it was incurable. No matter how many good deeds he did, or how much he denied it, he couldn't wash away the crimes he had committed. As the old man spoke, his voice grew fainter. Shi-young leaned down to hear what he hadn't finished saying. Suddenly, his oxygen saturation dropped. The alarm sounded throughout the hospital, and everyone's hearts tightened. Shi-young also noticed that Dok-yu's lymph nodes were swollen. The elderly man hadn't seen a doctor in a year, and all of these symptoms had a certain incubation period. Furthermore, the Nipah virus is a newly emerging infectious disease from overseas. But the old man hadn't flown in 40 years. Yo-han quickly guessed that he had been overseas 40 years ago. Shi-young didn't believe a virus could be dormant for so long. It turned out that Dok-yu had participated in overseas wars, and he was remorseful for having killed countless people. Mi-rae also said that she and the old man had participated in a public welfare activity together. Dok-yu and his comrades participated together. At this point, Yo-han's mind flashed with news about war and long-dormant viruses. Finally, They diagnosed it as melioidosis. This melioidosis had an incubation period of up to 63 years. Normally, before the development of the infection, it was very difficult to determine the cause, and the mortality rate was as high as 40%. They were now in a race against time. They had to treat Doc Gu quickly before he developed sepsis. So they immediately began treatment. Johann quickly found the cause, eliminating the panic. This attracted the attention of the media. Moon had wanted to punish Johann, but facing the media, he gave a sinister smile, wanting to use Johann's fame to benefit the hospital. At this point, Shi Young brought him to the room to check his body temperature and blood pressure. She was worried that his health was declining. Johann felt that Shi Young didn't need to make such a fuss. He could live well on his own, without her enthusiasm. On the contrary, it would end up hurting Shi Young, so Johann left the ward. Shi Young was disappointed, walking and thinking that what she cared about now wasn't Johann's congenital analgesia but him as a person. So Shi Young desperately ran to Johann. She disregarded everything and expressed her feelings to him, saying she liked him and wanted to be his guardian, to face sickness together. She ran towards Johann, expressing her feelings for him. Before he could respond, he was interrupted by a reporter. He was afraid that his negative news would affect Shi Young, so he stopped her in the elevator, closed the door, and asked her to leave. In a short period of time, Johann diagnosed Doc Gu with melioidosis. His reputation spread far and wide, so the media swarmed to interview him. However, the reporter Sung Won mentioned the incident from 3 years ago, when Johann had helped a patient to pass peacefully. He replied firmly, "My face doesn't say I am the doctor who helped a patient to pass peacefully." At the same time, Johann's lawyer appeared, blocking this annoying reporter and rescuing him from the crowd. That night, Shi Young couldn't sleep all night. She couldn't fall asleep for a long time. Her mind was filled with Johann's misfortunes. The next morning, they took the elevator together. Shi Young asked why Johann hadn't answered. Actually, his silence at that time meant he was rejecting her. But Johann still expressed his gratitude for Shi Young's affection. His dizziness and tinnitus got worse. After a day of tiring surgery, Johann fainted. Shi Young couldn't accept him being examined at the hospital where she worked. So, Shi Young told Ju Yoon to take the unconscious Johann to another hospital for a brain scan. Ju Yoon hadn't noticed anything unusual yet. Soon after, Johann woke up and saw that the doctor examining him was a doctor. Knowing that he was fine, he said he wanted to leave, but he was stopped by Shi Young and Ju Yoon. However, the two couldn't fight against Johann's determination to leave the hospital. After returning home, Shi Young offered to help him with his daily life, physical condition, and safety. However, Johann just smiled lightly and said that everyone gets a cold or fever. He advised Shi Young not to worry too much. Since he was young, Johann had lost his parents. Shi Young was the only one who understood him. But Johann rejected her intentions again, and asked her to help him keep his unusual body a secret. At the same time, Prosecutor Seok and the wicked woman Yoon Jong were plotting to prevent Johann from wearing a doctor's coat for life, to stop him from being a doctor. It turned out that all the hatred stemmed from 3 years ago. Johann had helped a patient pass peacefully, but before the patient had fallen ill, he had killed their child. There was no legal punishment because he had a terminal illness and was bedridden, living a life not worth living. Yoon Jong, out of cruelty, wanted revenge for him by forcing him to donate his body to a laboratory, wanting him to die a painful death as punishment. Yoon Jong took his hand, which was already weak, and forced him to sign, but she didn't expect Johann to let him pass peacefully. So Yoon Jong transferred her hatred for the criminal to his brother. 3 years later, she was plotting with Seok again. The next day, Johann attended a medical sharing meeting with 100 people, sharing his story of diagnosing a high school student with congenital analgesia and the dangers involved. No one knew he also had congenital analgesia. The sharing session touched Johann's pain. Suddenly, he started feeling dizzy, his ears ringing. He couldn't hear clearly in the hall, and he didn't know what he was saying. The staff brought him water, but he couldn't hold it steady. People in the audience noticed that Johann's health was unusual. Fortunately, Shi Young appeared on stage. Johann was in a daze, believing that the person walking towards him was Shi Young, and he felt relieved. Finally, he thought to himself, "Someone is coming to rescue me." So, Johann introduced Shi Young as the one who had discovered this condition in the high school student. She was more suitable to share her experience. That way, he wouldn't collapse in front of the crowd. Shi Young didn't disappoint. She was just an intern, yet she had such amazing control skills. Ju Kyung was proud of her. After this incident, Johann agreed to her request to help him 24/7. She was incredibly happy. It meant he had accepted her confession. Dr. Ju Yoon announced that the doctor treating Rihai was Johann. He immediately took a taxi to the hospital. Her wish was that she wouldn't be tormented by her illness anymore. Rihai was both a doctor and a fan of Johann. When she heard this, her eyes welled up. She felt that she had lived a very hard life. When other doctors left, only one he was left in deep thought. Then he slowly turned off Rihai's ventilator. The patient's safety was what Johann cared most about. He rushed there but was caught by a nurse entering. Johann became the suspect in the patient's ventilator being turned off. Moon learned that he was going to help a patient pass peacefully again and immediately criticized him severely, saying that Shi-young was also involved. At this time, Tae-kyung started to worry about her. Soon, an investigation was launched and the police investigated the scene, collecting evidence from witnesses. All suspicions pointed to Johann. The doctors in the orthopedic department were shocked when they learned about the patient's ventilator being turned off. Only one he stood there in a daze. It was clear that Johann was taking the blame for him. This time it was Seok-ki, the prosecutor who had charged Johann 3 years ago, questioning him. His goal was clear, to prevent Johann from being a doctor, but Johann wasn't going to defend himself. Through the police investigation, Yoo-jun called him at 4:55. The patient's ventilator was turned off at 5:05. However, at exactly 5 o'clock, Johann was at the scene of the incident on the rooftop. This made Seok-ki extremely suspicious. "What were you doing up there?" Johann replied, "I wanted to go up there and look at the sky." This answer was ridiculous. So, Seok-ki went to the surveillance room and checked the camera footage, discovering that Johann had rushed from the rooftop to the patient's room. This behavior wasn't like running to turn off a ventilator, but rather like rushing to save a patient. It turned out that Johann was on the rooftop and met Ri-hai's son, Min-sung. The boy looked at the sky and said, "My mom is in heaven now." Johann was extremely curious. Isn't Ri-hai still alive? At this point, Min-sung confessed that he also wanted to go see his mother, no matter how ugly she looked. In his eyes, she was still the most beautiful person. The reason Min-sung couldn't go was because his father had lied to Ri-hai's sister. Min-sung missed his mother, so he sneaked into the ward to see her. Min-sung saw a patient with weak signs of life like his mother, and it was the old woman's son who turned off the ventilator. He didn't want to prolong her pain for his own selfish reasons. So Min-sung also learned to turn off Ri-hai's ventilator. The mystery was finally solved. It wasn't one he or Johann, but Min-sung, Ri-hai's son. The reason Johann didn't explain was because he didn't want the child to be investigated by the police and burden the young soul with the crime of killing his mother. Johann knew that Min-sung truly wanted to see his mother. Ri-hai, who only had a few days left, also wanted to hold her son's hand and hug him. So Johann carried Min-sung and rushed to Ri-hai. He couldn't let these two loving mother and son be separated by life and death. So after taking Min-sung to the family waiting room, Johann rushed into Ri-hai's ward to save her. As a result, he was caught by a nurse as he arrived. The misunderstanding was explained clearly. Suddenly, Ri-hai had a cardiac arrest. It turned out that another doctor had already obtained her sister's consent and given up on treatment. Only Johann desperately performed CPR on her. He couldn't let her go without seeing Min-sung. Only Shi-young and Mai-rae cooperated with him to save Ri-hai, inserting a breathing tube to restore her heartbeat. The harder they tried, the less hope they saw. But Johann didn't give up. He kept increasing the electricity and repeated the resuscitation process. Finally, Ri-hai recovered her heartbeat. Johann looked at Shi-young and sighed in relief. At this point, Min-sung also slowly appeared outside the ward. Johann walked over and took the boy to his mother's side. The boy rushed into Ri-hai's arms and cried out loud. This heartwarming scene made the viewers tear up. Finally, mother and son could embrace each other. That evening, Ri-hai slowly opened her eyes and stroked Min-sung's cheek. She had met her son as she wished. Min-sung wasn't afraid of his mother's ugly face. The scene changes, and Ji-seok sees a muscular man at the gym. He had a plan in mind to quickly gain strong muscles. So Ji-seok secretly injected himself with steroids. As a result, he was paralyzed and taken to the hospital. Although Ji-seok lay paralyzed in a hospital bed, unable to move, he was still conscious and shed tears. This made the miracle Dr. Johann feel uncomfortable. He longed for him to save him quickly. They learned that they shared a similar fate, both patients with congenital analgesia. They had encouraged each other and hoped that the other would try to live on. Not long after, Ji-seok finally opened his eyes, but unfortunately, his arms and legs were no longer controlled by his brain, and he couldn't speak. He could only blink to communicate. From then on, they could determine the cause of his illness. Johann and Shi-young both agreed on the diagnosis of locked-in syndrome. Although his brain was conscious, it couldn't react to external stimuli. Finally finding the cause, they breathed a sigh of relief. Johann also noticed an unexplained wound on Ji-seok's body. At this point, Shi-young said to everyone in the group chat, Ji-seok was taken to an abandoned warehouse by his school bully to be tortured by dogs. The bully knew he couldn't feel pain, so he often beat Ji-seok. But today, they went too far and beat him so hard that he fell against a table, coincidentally hitting his head, causing Ji-seok to faint. So, Johann immediately arranged for the doctors to do a CTA scan on Ji-seok. He suspected that it was due to a ruptured vertebral artery inside that caused slow blood flow, leading to vertebral artery dissection. If Ji-seok was really like this, his condition would be very unstable. After Shi Young left, Johan was about to stand up when he suddenly felt dizzy. The world spinning, and he fell to the ground. Luckily, no one saw him. So, Johan took a sedative to alleviate his condition. It became more serious. He constantly seized every moment to save more patients, and also continued to investigate the cause and treatment for Gi Seok. They found a dirty shirt stained with mud in his backpack. Johan suspected this might be a contributing factor. So that evening, he went alone to the warehouse where Gi Seok had been beaten. He observed the environment around the warehouse, and the entire process of Gi Seok being tortured unfolded before Johan's eyes, as if he were putting himself in his shoes. Johan meticulously noticed that there was gasoline where Gi Seok had fallen. So he quickly called Ju Yoon, immediately arranged for an MRI, an MRA scan of the brain, as well as a tracheal aspirate to check for infection. If Gi Seok lacked immunity, inhaling gasoline-stained mud would affect his brain, causing locked-in syndrome. Through Johan's efforts, they finally had a correct diagnosis. The doctors immediately went to examine him. Johan also came out of the warehouse. Suddenly, his illness began to recur, causing him unbearable pain. After returning for the examination, Ju Yoon told Shi Young to call Johan once she had the results. But no matter how many times she called him, no one answered. As a result, Johan had fallen to the ground, bleeding profusely. At the same time, Yoon Jung and Seki learned that Johan was a patient with congenital analgesia. She posted his condition on the hospital's website, making Moon and the doctors angry. Everyone found it hard to believe that Johan had saved countless people, yet he couldn't feel pain. He didn't deserve to be a doctor. Yoon Jung, the mother of the child who was killed, transferred her hatred to Johan. She learned from Johan's old friends that he didn't use anesthesia, yet he still treated his wounds without feeling, with a blank expression. Under the blazing sun, everyone working was sweating profusely. Only Johan still wore his labor uniform and didn't sweat at all. Yoon Jung learned that he was a patient with congenital analgesia and didn't sweat. She was both surprised and delighted. She had worked hard to find evidence, wanting Johan to be unable to survive in the medical field. Finally, she had found his weakness. So Yoon Jung told this shocking news to prosecutor Seok Ki, whose son was also killed. They had been working together to confront Johan for 3 years. Now, Yoon Jung believed that he was putting on a show when he saved patients. Johan couldn't feel pain, so how could he experience the fear of his patients? So, Yoon Jung decided to sue Johan again. When Seok Ki saw the news about him talking about congenital analgesia, he was surprised. He thought that he had been fooled by Johan all this time. At the same time, Johan fainted at the warehouse. Shi Young was heartbroken. She cried and called the police, explaining the situation. Fortunately, he only fell on his leg, so he wasn't seriously injured. First, Yoon Jung posted about Johan being a patient with congenital analgesia on the hospital's website. After learning about this, Moon was extremely shocked. If this continued, it would surely affect the hospital's profits. So, he summoned the hospital leaders to discuss whether Johan should stay or leave. Kwon Suk mocked him. Johan can't feel the pain of his patients, so what right does he have to treat them? Johan responded, even if I can't feel it, my persistence in research on diseases means I will never misdiagnose a patient. Moreover, patients trust and rely on me. At this point, Moon ordered Johan to be forbidden from treating any patients. It would be easier to simply fire him. So, Johan asked him for one last chance to treat Gi Seok. After all, he had found the cause of Gi Seok's illness. Moon flatly refused his request, adamantly refusing to let Johan examine him. Johan left the meeting room sadly, his department colleagues waiting for him outside. Even though he was forbidden from treating patients, they still trusted him and promised to continue following his arrangements. They said, "This disease is similar to the old man's case. They will overcome this obstacle by sharing information." Their warm words of encouragement cheered Johan up. As long as they were together, they could fight side by side. That night, Seok Ki found Johan and questioned him, "If you don't feel pain, doesn't that mean you also don't feel sympathy when helping patients pass peacefully?" Then he questioned, "Does Johan really have the right to practice medicine?" But clearly, Johan didn't have the energy to care about his questions, so he turned around and tried to leave. However, Seok Ki still wouldn't let him go. As a result, Johan angrily retorted, "Seok Ki, you know I have congenital analgesia, so what are you trying to prove to me? Do you want to know if Johan is truly kind-hearted or a hypocrite when he works in the medical profession? Furthermore, only my patients have the right to ask me if I have the right to be a doctor. For Johan, all of my patients need me. I have to fight for my patients against death every minute of every day. I don't have time to waste here arguing with Seok Ki." Johan scolded him so fiercely that he was speechless. The next day, Gi Seok's heart rate dropped severely. Ju Yoon called Johan to tell him. He rushed there, not caring about any consequences, because if he were even a second late, Gi Seok might die. When he arrived at Gi Seok's ward, Taekyung blocked Johan, preventing him from participating in the treatment and telling him that Ji Seok's recovery rate was almost zero. Even if Johan could save Ji Seok with his skills, he would be bedridden for the rest of his life, which would only cause Ji Seok more pain, not save him. For this reason, Taekyung questioned Johan, "Are you saving people for the sake of the patient or to save yourself?" However, Johan didn't hesitate. He only wanted to protect Ji Seok's life with all his skills, to fight against the disease of insensitivity together. So Johan disregarded Taekyung's obstruction and pushed Ji Seok into the operating room. But just as they reached the operating room, Ji Seok's heart stopped beating. Johan could only try CPR, but no matter how hard he tried to get his heart going, it was useless. The atmosphere was filled with helplessness. Johan had tried his best to fight against death. Then, Ji Seok's mother agreed to give up on treating him. Shi Young told Johan about the patient's family's wishes, but he still continued CPR on Ji Seok, muttering in prayer, "Ji Seok, keep fighting to live. As long as you're alive, there's still hope." But in the end, Johan still couldn't save Ji Seok from death. Now Ji Seok had left the world. Looking at his trembling hands, Johan felt helpless, powerless against death. He cried, feeling Ji Seok's still warm body, yet unable to do anything. At the same time, he was about to face death himself. Johan met Won-gil, introduced by lawyer Kim, Myung-oh's close friend. Won-gil suffered from muscular dystrophy, and his frail appearance meant he could only get around in a wheelchair. However, he told Johan that he had found a way to eliminate the pain for Won-gil, not through treatment, but through a peaceful passing. So he showed Johan a video of the experiment of a drug called SIBO, used to inject into patients. They wanted to use this video to persuade Johan to do research with them. At the same time, they introduced this happiness drug to major hospitals. As a result, Johan took out his phone, threatening to call the police, saying that their actions were completely inciting murder. "You're killing my patients, and you're afraid of me calling the police?" Then he questioned Won-gil, "Is this what you call treatment?" Unexpectedly, he replied, "Everyone can't escape death. Who can be calm in the face of the Grim Reaper? But this drug can do that. What's wrong with it?" He also asked Johan back. "One side is the patient suffering pain. The other side is this drug. Which would you choose?" Obviously, Johan didn't share their opinion, and he angrily left. But he was stopped by Myung-oh, who said that he also had muscular dystrophy. This drug was his hope for survival. But Johan refused to let them take advantage of him because he knew their goal was not just to provide this drug to patients in hospitals who needed it, but to turn it into something that could harm anyone, making anyone die and turning it into a situation where they couldn't be saved. At the same time, doctors would become dependent on this drug. He couldn't imagine how many doctors would choose to give up and do nothing. As a result, Johan stood in front of Won-gil's house and called Seok, telling him who the mastermind was behind the happiness drug he had been investigating all this time. This would surely solve the case that had been giving Seok a headache for so long. So, Seok asked Johan curiously, "Why me and not other prosecutors?" Seok didn't expect Johan to admire him so much. He said that he didn't care and wouldn't give up to external pressure. Moreover, he was the only one who persisted with the investigation. Johan also told Seok that he should devote his persistence to something meaningful, rather than wasting it on him. When Seok ran to Won-gil's house, he was dead after being injected. He was so close to solving the problem. Not only that, a patient from the same ward went missing. It turned out that he had been dragged to a remote wasteland to be injected. The doctor was the one who had given Johan water at the press conference. He had been secretly researching the drug with Won-gil for a long time. After the truth was exposed, he escaped abroad with Myung-oh, carrying the elixir with him. On the other hand, Yoon-jung was blinded by hatred and insisted on accusing Johan. Seok thought she was misguided and needed to be straightened out. Yoon-jung criticized Seok. "Did he brainwash you?" Then she angrily turned around and left. Unexpectedly, Seok clutched his stomach in pain and collapsed to the ground. It turned out he had stage 3 stomach cancer. The pain had been plaguing him ever since. Finally, Seok gradually understood his son's desire for Johan to help him pass peacefully. At the same time, he also hoped that Johan would help him with his pain. It didn't matter how, as long as he could be relieved and not have to endure the pain anymore. The reason he was so adamant about preventing Johan from being a doctor was because he was still haunted by the fact that he had let his son suffer. He wanted Johan to pay the price for his actions. The scene shifts. Shi Young had harmed the father of the two sisters, creating a rift and estrangement between them. Although Mai Ray was younger, she had more talent for being a doctor than Shi Young. So, when Shi Young returned to the hospital for an internship, Mai Ray held a grudge against her, not only uttering harsh words but also mocking Shi Young for not saving her father. She told her she wasn't qualified to be a doctor, and warned her, "I swear I won't let Shi Young have her way here." However, when the miracle Dr. Johan was operating on a patient, he specifically asked Shi Young to assist him. while Myra could only watch silently from the observation room. Her anger and resentment made her hate her sister even more. So, while everyone was celebrating the successful surgery that day, Myra disrupted the happy atmosphere by bringing up the matter of Johan helping a patient pass peacefully. She questioned Johan, "Don't you feel ashamed and guilty towards the patient?" But she didn't know that the patient's mother didn't want her child to suffer anymore. However, after Johan learned about this, he still defied everything and saved the patient. But the patient really didn't want to live anymore, so he personally pleaded with Johan to help him find peace. Despite this, Myra still had a prejudice against Johan. So she warned Shi Young to stay away from the wicked Johan, saying that who knows what unusual things you might do if you're charmed by him. It made her extremely worried and disgusted. However, witnessing Johan's concern for his patients and his wholehearted dedication to saving them, Myra gradually realized that her prejudice against Johan was childish. Furthermore, when Shi Young carelessly tripped and fell while wearing protective gear in the ward, Myra was startled and started worrying about Shi Young. After all, a single drop of blood is more valuable than a whole pond of water. When Shi Young safely came out of the ward, Myra ran over from the crowd. They looked at each other, neither saying a word, but in their hearts, they had overcome that mountain of hatred. The next day, Shi Young cared for her father as usual. At this time, Myra appeared with a towel and a wash basin in hand. They still didn't talk to each other. Myra shaved her father's beard, while Shi Young quietly prepared a towel from Myra and handed it to her. Myra hesitated for a while before taking the towel. Both of them were doing the same thing, taking care of their father. I think their father could feel that his two beloved daughters were by his side. Unexpectedly, the next day, Shi Young and Myra both received a call from their mother. After confirming that their father's condition was critical, Myra cried and said that she was afraid he was going to leave her. Shi Young patiently comforted her and then held her hand, the two sisters running hand in hand toward their parents. Their mother told them that their father's blood oxygen saturation was continuously decreasing and he probably wouldn't last long. At this point, Myra was no longer as stubborn as she used to be. She knew her father was about to leave, so she said to him, "We will miss you, Dad." Shi Young hugged her father and felt his weak heartbeat. Isu could also feel Shi Young's warmth. It turned out that Isu had signed an organ donation form a long time ago. Myra didn't know about this until now. Actually, Isu had been calm about death for a long time. Why was she holding on to her father for so long? So they both held their father's hand. Because of this, Myra and Shi Young finally resolved their previous grievances. They took their father to the operating room and said goodbye one last time. After sending their father to his final resting place, Myra knocked on Shi Young's door and said softly, "It's been a long time, elder sister. Myra wants to move in and live with you." Shi Young slowly walked over, hugged her younger sister, and agreed to live with Myra, her face filled with tears. The two sisters had always loved each other. The younger sister shouldn't have resisted her elder sister because of her hatred. So they both apologized to each other. Seok Ki took his key and it fell to the ground. He was plagued by agonizing pain. His car sped down the road. There was a large truck coming towards him at speed. Seok Ki used all his strength to turn the steering wheel and stop the car, narrowly avoiding disaster. Fortunately, there was no collision. The driver quickly got out of his car and yelled at him for not knowing how to drive, but seeing Seok Ki grimacing in pain. He quickly called an ambulance. After getting into the ambulance, Seok Ki asked to be taken to the miracle Dr. Johan for treatment. He was a prosecutor who had recently declared that he would make Johan take off his doctor's coat. But now he was specifically asking for Johan, wanting to find him. After he arrived at the hospital, Johan quickly ran over. He didn't discriminate against patients, because at this moment, he was the patient. After a general examination, knowing Seok Ki had stage 3 stomach cancer, Johan went back to his office to look at Seok Ki's medical records and tapped his chair repeatedly. Johan quickly deduced and diagnosed that Seok Ki had been using pain relievers. Now he had to give him a pain pump to replace the pain relievers to eliminate his stomach pain. Seok Ki agreed to Johan operating on him without hesitation. Now he completely trusted Johan's skills. So, Johan said he would operate tomorrow. He said this as he left. But at this point, Seok Ki asked Johan, "Why don't you ask me why I only came to you and not other doctors?" Johan smiled and replied, "Because he is so stubborn." His words hit Seok Ki's heart. Now, having become a patient himself, he understood how much he needed Johan's persistence. Only Johan's persistence gave him hope for life. Johan quickly completed Seok Ki's surgery. He even visited him in the ward that evening. As he left the ward, he passed Yoon-jung. Unexpectedly, Johan turned around and stood facing her. Yoon-jung was confused and questioned him, saying that after he caused her son to die, she couldn't avenge him, so she transferred her hatred to Johan. She wanted Johan to suffer as she had, to make her feel better. But Johan was indifferent. Unexpectedly, he said, "I can't feel the pain of losing your son." Regarding Johan's carelessness in bumping into Yun Jong, she had seen him holding the patient's hand and forcing them to sign an organ donation form, and Johan had witnessed this firsthand. But in court, he still admitted that he was the one who had caused the patient's death. Until now, Johan still blamed himself for not being able to stop Yun Jong at that time, so he sincerely apologized to her. With that, Johan turned and left, leaving Yun Jong consumed by endless remorse. Seeing Seo-ki being saved by Johan, she realized that what she had done was indeed villainous. Initially, she was convinced that she was the victim. In the end, she was the one who had hurt others. At this moment, she finally let go of her misunderstanding and hatred towards Johan. Not long after, Seo-ki's condition gradually improved. So, he held a press conference to propose improvements to the patient's right to a peaceful passing. He suggested that respecting the patient's right to a peaceful passing and ending their lives, relieving them of physical pain through appropriate measures, should be legal. At this point, Yun Jong came forward and clarified. 3 years ago, Johan didn't force the patient to die. Johan also thought that it wasn't pushing patients to death, but allowing them to continue living in the other world. Now that the misunderstanding had been resolved, Johan and Seo-ki joined hands, smiling and embracing each other warmly. Our world is indeed harmonious and beautiful like that. Even first love had to be long distance. Johan didn't expect to fall ill 3 days after he went abroad, ending up bedridden. He couldn't move, he could only move his eyes. Once he had fallen into the clutches of death, even breathing became a luxury, let alone seeing her, his girlfriend who was waiting for him in Korea every day. When they first met, Johan sent Shi-young an email every day on time to report his health status. His colleagues were incredibly envious of the two of them. Their love was so passionate despite being long distance. But suddenly one day, there was no news from Johan. He couldn't be reached by phone either. Shi-young was very worried. She took her suitcase and flew to America to find Johan. Love always makes people lose their composure. Shi-young called Johan as she boarded the plane. Finally, the call connected, but the person who answered was Johan's colleague. He lied that Johan was working an extra shift in the laboratory, but in reality, Johan had fallen into a deep coma. Shi-young had no idea what was going on. She felt relieved after hearing this. She texted Johan, telling him to keep in touch, then pulled her suitcase and went back, but she was restless. The next day, there was still no news from Johan. Shi-young kept calling him, but his colleague always answered and used the excuse that Johan was busy to deceive her. Having no other choice, Shi-young went online to look at pictures of Johan to satisfy her longing. Time flew by, 6 months had passed, and Shi-young still hadn't received a text message or call from Johan. But Heo-run saw news reports that Johan's research on congenital analgesia in a donated body was making initial progress. Seeing the empty chat window, Shi-young's heart ached so much that she couldn't speak. That night, she went out drinking with her colleagues. In her drunken state, she cursed him out, calling him a bad guy. Really, Shi-young could only confide in her sister about this. Time flew by in a blink of an eye. 3 years had passed. From a timid intern student, Shi-young had become a skilled specialist. Any intern who was slacking off would be scolded without hesitation, so she was given the nickname Crazy Lady. Shi-young angrily went out to vent her frustration, walking down the road where she first met Johan. The scene brought back memories. Johan's image was still clear in her mind as if it were yesterday. When Shi-young pressed the elevator button, a handsome figure suddenly flashed by, with sharp, polished shoes. She felt that it was Johan. Shi-young slowly turned around. Indeed, Johan was standing behind her. The boyfriend who had been out of touch for 3 years suddenly appeared. They were both very calm. They didn't hug and cry. They just said nonchalantly, "Long time no see, and how are you?" Shi-young didn't know what to feel. She was happy and worried at the same time. She simply asked Johan when he had returned to Korea. Unexpectedly, he had returned to Korea a year ago, but hadn't come to find Shi-young. Firstly, maybe in Johan's heart, Shi-young was no longer that important to him, or he had already fallen in love with someone else. Just as Shi-young was lost in her tangled thoughts, her phone rang incessantly, interrupting their conversation. Their encounter ended abruptly. Shi-young's patient suddenly had severe abdominal pain, and pain relievers weren't working. But then the patient cheerfully said they weren't in pain anymore. This left everyone confused. Hyo-yun rushed in to tell everyone that Johan had returned to the hospital. But he was interrupted by the doctors who were preoccupied with the patient's condition. After a lot of back and forth, Oh-yun finally got his point across. Everyone was happy that Johan had returned safely. Only Shi-young was filled with thoughts, leaving the office. The patient suddenly had abdominal pain again, but didn't know where it was, and then fell asleep shortly after. Faced with this situation, everyone said, if Johan were here, he would have diagnosed the cause of the illness in less than 10 seconds. As a result, Shi-young stood up abruptly, pointed her finger at them and scolded, "Does it mean we can't do anything without him?" Then she stormed out of the office. trying to figure out the patient's illness. Suddenly, Johan was sitting behind them. Ju Yoon was then excitedly recounting the patient's symptoms, but actually, he wanted Johan to hear this. It turned out that Ju Yoon had called Johan earlier, asking for his help with this difficult case. Ju Yoon grabbed the patient's medical records and read them to Johan. It seemed like they had an unspoken understanding. They looked at each other like they were back in the days when they fought side by side 3 years ago. After that, Johan texted Shi-young, reminding her to check the electroencephalogram again. Shi-young quickly realized she had missed this step and quickly measured the patient's 24-hour sleep EEG. She diagnosed the patient with irritable bowel syndrome. If treated correctly, the patient would recover very quickly. The problem that had plagued Shi-young for so long was solved by Johan in an instant. That evening, they went out to celebrate their successful treatment. As usual, a colleague asked him if he was staying at the hospital. He smiled and said goodbye, implying that he wouldn't be returning to the hospital. Johan left. His colleagues at the party wanted to take him home, but he stopped them. Johan left without looking back. Yu-run then confessed, actually, Johan had been back with Shi-young for a year, but he just silently watched her. He was afraid that Shi-young would see him, so he covered his face with his coffee cup when they were eating and gazed at Shi-young. Suddenly, Shi-young looked up, so he hid. The reason Johan hadn't gone to see Shi-young immediately was because he had to train himself to recover his health. He wanted to be by Shi-young's side when he was at his healthiest. Finally learning the truth, Shi-young rushed after him, but Johan was long gone. Just as Shi-young was sinking into despair, Johan suddenly grabbed her hand from behind. Shi-young hugged Johan without hesitation. She really couldn't bear to forget him. She was afraid of losing him again. Shi-young said, "Johan, you're not allowed to go anywhere without my permission." Facing Shi-young, the only one who understood and loved him, Johan lifted her lovely face with both hands and gently kissed her. At this moment, even the night breeze was overly sweet. Johan rejected Shi-young's mother's invitation again, choosing to dedicate his skills to the elderly who truly needed him at a remote nursing home. He tried to feel their pain and encourage them in the final moments of their lives, counting by the second without being able to use their pain relievers. The day ended with laughter and joy. The movie ends here. See you in the next video. Goodbye.